In this demonstration, we're going to be running through text functions, which are, of course, most useful for manipulating text. And before we get started on this, once again, I just want to say that yes, you can do a lot of these things in DAX, but you can also do them in the Power Query editor. And if I'm being completely honest, a lot of these transformations that you're going to watch me do in this video are easier in the Power Query editor. So I feel like I've been plugging away for the Power Query editor. It's an amazing tool. You can perform all these transformations and just load them into your model and really decrease the bandwidth that Power BI has to dedicate to sort of making these transformations in the front end using something like DAX. So I'll get off my soapbox, we'll jump right back into it. We're going to talk about some of the most important DAX functions that you can use if you find yourself in situations where you need them, which is totally fine. However, we're not going to be writing a whole lot of measures right away in this lesson because measures are primarily used for aggregating elements from your data model for use in data visuals. And text values, of course, don't really lend themselves very easily to aggregation. You can't really sum or average a text string, right? So we're going to actually start over here in our data and specifically in our stores table, which contains 3 columns that have text values. Things like city names, store locations, there are spaces, all kinds of different characters that we can sort of call using these text functions. So it's a good place to practice. And so we're going to be creating a lot of columns here. A lot of these columns are fairly useless in my opinion, but they're going to help us learn and practice some of these DAX text functions. The first 2 columns that I'm going to create just by making calculated fields are going to help us practice upper and lower, which if you've ever used these in something like Excel or SQL, or if you've never even heard of them, they just help you reference a column from another table, but return that text value in either all uppercase or all lowercase, hence the upper and lower. So the first column we're going to create is going to be called location using our store location field. And I'm going to call this location upper. I'm going to use the upper function, and I'm going to call our store location field. And when I submit this, of course, it's going to come back with my 4 store locations: residential, commercial, downtown, and airport, but now all capitalized. Just to make my life easier, I'm just going to copy that DAX string, and I'm going to create a new column and paste it, and I'm going to call this location lower, and instead of using the upper function, I'm going to use the lower function, and that is going to return all lowercase versions of my 4 store locations. So far pretty easy, right? The next column that I'm going to create is going to help us practice the left function, and this is going to be location left 5. And what this is going to do is it's going to pull the first or left 5 characters from our store location. So in the first example here, residential, the resulting output here is going to be resid, or just the first 5 characters or the left 5 characters of store location. So we're going to call the left function. We're going to point it at our store location field. And up here in the hence, you can see it wants to know how many characters I want to return. And we're going to return 5 characters, or the left 5 characters. For the next column, we're going to practice right. So we're going to call this location right. And instead of 5, just to mix things up, we're going to pull the right or last 3 characters. So for residential, it'll be IAL. And instead of pulling it from just store location, let's pull our location upper instead. So we're going to call the right function. We're going to pull location upper, and we're going to pull the final 3 characters, which of course is the all caps last 3 characters in our location. Pretty easy stuff so far. We're only going to complicate it a little bit more by adding a location mid. And we're going to start in the 4th position here. And we're going to call the mid function. And I'm going to use my location upper again. But this time we're going to only pull from the 4th character all the way to the end. So instead of pulling residential, I'm basically going to pull edential. So let's go ahead and grab location upper. And I'm going to start in the 4th position. And it wants to know how many characters I want to carry this forward. And I'm just going to enter a big number to make sure that I absolutely capture everything. And now you can see I've got Edential and In-Town and Mercial and Port down here. So basically, I'm just pulling everything starting with the 4th character position in my location. If for some reason I didn't want to pull everything after that 4th position, and I, for example, just wanted to pull IDE and NTO, I can also not go 1,000 characters out, and maybe I just want to go 3 characters out. So now I've got Id, Mer, Into, and Por. Again, don't really know what I would do with this column. It doesn't seem particularly helpful, but it helps demonstrate how the mid function works. We're basically starting right smack in the middle of a string value and then pulling a specific number of characters beyond that out of the text. So pretty easy. The next 2 functions I want to talk about are basically identical, and that is find and search. So we're going to create a new column here, and we're going to find a space in our store city. So we're going to just use the find function, and we're going to specify which value we want to find, which of course is space, and within our store city. And we're just going to start in the 1st position. And if we can't find a space, we want to return just a 0 here. And so you can see I've got a 3 here for La Paz, indicating that there's a space in the 3rd character position. I've got a 7 for Ciudad de Mexico, indicating there's a space in the 7th position. And I have a 4 for San Luis Potosi, indicating there is a space in the 4th position. So notice, if we want to use the search function, we can literally just replace that perfectly. And now we've got search space. Find, search, very, very similar. And if you find yourself asking, well, how am I going to find the 2nd space in Ciudad de Mexico? It's pretty easy overall. We're going to instead search within store city. We're going to find, once again, a space. And this time we're going to start from the position of the 1st space. Instead of starting all the way at the beginning, we're going to start with the location of the 1st space, and we're just going to add 1 to that. So in other words, in the situation of Ciudad de Mexico, we're not going to start in the position of the 1st space. We're actually going to start with the D that comes after it by just adding 1 number to the character position. And if we don't find anything, once again, we want a 0. And now you can see that the only values it returned were Ciudad de Mexico and San Luis Potosi, which are the only 2 values in store city that have multiple spaces. So we've got a 10 indicating the location of our 2nd space and a 9 indicating the position of our 2nd space for those 2 store cities. Now we're going to jump into a text function that personally always confuses me, and that is substitute. Because when do we use substitute? When we want to replace one text value with another. If you're like me, then why aren't we using the replace function? Well, we'll come back to that in just a second. But to kick things off, we're going to start with kind of an easier example which utilizes the substitute function. So this time we're going to substitute underscores for spaces. And so I'll just call this column sub underscore. And I just realized that I was about to overwrite my search space. That wouldn't do any good. So let's call this sub underscore. And we're going to use our substitute function. And we're going to search within store city. And we're going to search for a space. And we're going to replace it with an underscore. And we're just going to do this for 1 instance. And so you can see over here in the result for this DAX string, we have our city names, but the first space here has been substituted with an underscore. And just like we did in the previous example where we nested multiple string or text functions together, we can also do that here. So if we want to grab that second space as well, all we have to do is just keep nesting this. And so this time we're going to substitute our already polished column but we're going to do it again. We're going to search for yet another space, and we're going to replace that with an underscore. And so now we're taking the output of our first text manipulation, which are the values here where we've already got one underscore replaced, and we're basically telling Power BI, hey, run that back and do it again. So this time we're going to take our output and we're going to substitute that where we look for a space and replace it with an underscore. This grabs the second space because the first space has already been replaced in the first part of this DAX string. So again, actually pretty easy to do, but even easier to do in the Power Query editor. But that's how you use substitute. Next, we're going to get into how do you combine multiple text values together. And so let's go ahead and create a new column. And for this one, we're going to be using a DAX function called concatenate. So we're going to call this concat, and we're going to concat location and city. So just to kind of demonstrate how this works, let's call concatenate. We're going to call location, our store location field, and store city. And you can see that the resulting output is exactly that. It just combines whatever is in store location with whatever is in store city. There's no spaces or anything separating them. They just literally get stitched exactly together as they are. And if we want to change the order here, no problem. We can start with store city and from there concatenate store location. So we can basically swap the positions here. Pay close attention as I submit this. Now Guadalajara is first and residential is second, and we've just swapped these back and forth. You can get pretty crazy with your concatenation if you want to. For example, if we want to instead concatenate the word store followed by a colon and a space, and now we're going to call store name after this text string that we manually entered here. And I'm going to change the name of this to instead. Let's call this store name new. Now we have, store colon space followed by our store name. And maybe, you want to leave this column here, but you're thinking, maybe I don't want to, put store as the word. Let's try something else instead of store. Let's create a new column. And here we're going to circle back to the function that I told you I found confusing with substitute. We're going to actually use replace. So let's call this one store name replace. And instead of using store, we're actually going to replace our store name new. And we're going to start in the first position. We're going to go out 5 characters, or just to the end of the word store. And we're going to instead write location instead of store. So now we've taken the first position through the 5th position, and we've replaced whatever happens to be there with the word location instead. So finally, just to kind of wrap things up, because concatenating can be really useful, and in fact, we're going to circle back to that in just a moment when we start actually writing some text measures that can be useful, I'm going to show you some other tricks for concatenating values. The next one is going to be combine values. And so let's go ahead and just call this combine string. And for combine values, the first thing it's going to ask us for is some kind of a delimiter to separate all of the values that we're combining. So I'm just going to use an underscore here. And maybe we decide that we want to combine store location and store city and store name. The resulting string here takes all of the values that we specified, location, city, and name, and just joins them together, separated by underscores. There is a shortcut to concatenating that is really, really useful that I want to make sure that you're aware of. And that is, you don't actually have to use the concatenate function at all. This is one of those functions that is so useful that Power BI actually included a shortcut for us just using our keyboard. So let's go ahead and add one more new column. And we're going to call this concatenate shortcut. And here, we're going to just recreate what we have over here with store name new, but we're going to call this store location colon space. And instead of calling concatenate, we're just going to use an ampersand here. And on the other side of that ampersand, we're going to call our location upper field. And you can see I've got the exact same thing here, right? It just, literally concatenated or joined the free text that I wrote with an actual value being pulled from my data, from my column here. So we don't have to write concatenate. We can just use an ampersand when we're kind of, combining fields together, and it's a lot easier. And this is actually what we're going to build on as we hop back over here into our measures. So real quickly, I'm just going to go ahead and create a visual real quickly. And I'm going to grab product category. I'm going to turn it into a bar chart. And I'm going to grab from our logical information DAX, the profit column that we created. And I'm going to go ahead and add a card showing our full profit. Whoops, wrong measure. I'm going to go ahead and adjust this so that it's showing the full value. And I'm going to now add a product category slicer as well that you can see the user can just click on. And there we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dynamic title for this chart based on what the user has selected here and the total profit for that value. So let's go ahead and take our text measure here, and we're going to just practice some basic DAX measures here. So let's go ahead and call this selected product category. And this is going to use our selected value measure or function that we've already talked about. And it's going to fetch product category. And I forgot that I already did this once. So let's go ahead and just call this, for simplicity's sake, let's just give it underscore name. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this value out here just so we can kind of see how everything is working as we build this. And of course, selected value is blank right now because I haven't actually selected a value from product category. So of course, if I go to arts and crafts, electronics, games, sports and outdoors, toys, you can see that it's working. And you can also see, of course, that my profit measure up here changes as I slice through things. So now let's create a new measure. We're going to call this dynamic title. And we're going to start by just keeping it fairly simple. Let's call this dynamic title show me the profit for, and I'm just going to leave this kind of closed off, and I'm going to add an and to sort of concatenate these values together. So I've got my ampersand here, and I'm going to call that selected product category measure that I just created. And I'm going to go ahead and drag this out here. Whoops, dynamic title. And you can see that right now there's nothing in it because I haven't actually selected anything here. But you can see that as soon as I select something, it's saying show me the profit for arts and crafts, electronics, games, sports and outdoors, and toys. So now we're just going to kind of build on this to create a better dynamic title. I'm going to call this dynamic title 2, and we're going to add some conditional logic here. Basically, if selected value for product category equals blank, which you can see it equals right now because nothing is selected here, then what is the profit for all product categories? Otherwise, if it's not blank, what is the profit for, I'm going to use an ampersand followed by the measure that I created for selected product category. And now let's go ahead and add this to our chart here. I'm going to go to General, I'm going to go to Title, and I'm going to click on the conditional formatting for my title, indicating that I want to add a dynamic DAX-driven title. And I'm going to scroll down to my text measures and grab dynamic title 2. And you can see that it's pulling what is the profit for all product categories, which is what I get when there is nothing selected. If I go up here and select art and crafts or electronics, games, sports and outdoors, you can see that the title automatically updates, of course. So let's just keep kind of, playing with these dynamic titles. So dynamic title 3, we could get real crazy here and come up, let's see. If selected product category equals blank, this time let's show the title as profit for all product categories. And let's join our profit measure to that. And if selected product category is not blank, let's do profit for, and I'm going to pull my selected product category, and I'm going to add a colon and a space, and then I'm going to grab my profit measure. So now we have a text string that we're manually putting in, but we're inserting our own DAX logic along the way. So we're basically going to say profit for whatever is selected here, or if nothing is selected, profit for all product categories. And then afterwards, we're actually going to pull the filtered profit value here. However, let's go ahead and add this just as a test. Let's go ahead and grab dynamic title 3. First thing that we're going to notice is that we've lost the formatting on our DAX measure, which is fine. It actually, I've set myself up to show you the last text function that we're going to talk about here, and that is format. So we have profit for all product categories, and we've got the right number here, but it's not formatted. If we select arts and crafts, you can see that it filters exactly the way that it should. We've got our dynamic title set up. It just needs to be correctly formatted. So we're going to go back to dynamic title 3, and we're going to add something to profit. And the reason that we have lost the $sign in the formatting is that by folding these calculations, these measures into this text string, we are transforming this from a number into a text string that just happens to be a number. But because we're changing it as we're creating the dynamic title, changing this number into a text value, we have to remind Power BI how this number should look. And it's really easy to set this up. We're just going to wrap this profit measure that we're calling in the format function, and we're going to tell it to format it as a currency. And we have to do it in both places, of course. Now you can see that it's formatted correctly. And you can also see that it has 2 trailing zeros on it. That might be fine for you, but maybe you're like me and it's just like, I really don't want to show those 2 zeros after the decimal. I just want it to be closed off at the, at the end of this $29. So no problem. You can specify that you want something formatted as a currency. You can specify that you want your dates formatted as short date or something, for example. But you can also just kind of use wildcards to tell Power BI exactly how you want this formatted. And in this case, what I'm doing is I'm going to tell Power BI that I want this formatted like so. I want it to start with a $sign. I want there to be, every 3 characters to be separated by a comma. And I want it to just end with whatever the last digit is, even if it's 0. I don't want any decimal places. No problem, Power BI can read this just fine and understand how to format that number accordingly. So we're going to go ahead and change that, and you can see immediately that the decimal places fell off there. If you're kind of going back and forth and you're like, you know what, maybe I do want to show 1 decimal place, no problem. You can just add 0.0, and now Power BI is going to add a 0, or if you want to, don't know why you would, you can add as many zeros to the end of this as you want to. I'm just trying to give you a feel for how this sort of wildcard formatting works. And when you're done, make sure that you have all of your quotation marks in the right place. And then we can finish things up. So now we've got a dynamic title. This is the primary instance when I would want to use DAX or text functions within the context of a measure, is just to give myself this sort of dynamic formatting to help improve the user experience and make sure that the user always knows kind of what they're looking at all times. And it also saves me some real estate, because if I just had a card here with the total profit, maybe I don't need that. Maybe I could just remind the user what the total profit is in the title by sort of nesting these functions together. So if the user wants to know, okay, I see profit for toys is almost $1.08 million or whatever, and I see that electronics is just over $1 million in profit, but what does all this sum up to? You could add a dynamic title or something that rolls up the total profit for the visual and just show it to the user that way. It's just an idea. But anyway, that at least gets you started with some very basic, very common text functions. There are other text functions that I didn't talk about, but I do feel like, honestly, these functions here have covered most of my bases for the better part of a decade. So once again, just to kind of recap, just because you can do this stuff here in DAX doesn't mean you should. Always try to do stuff like this in the Power Query editor when you can, but specifically in instances where you're trying to come up with like dynamic titles that change based on the user's interactions, those are things that you can't do in the Power Query editor. So that is when you would absolutely want to create some dynamic text measures to sort of stitch together what the user is looking at any one time, just to sort of give them a little bit more information and sort of tell them dynamically what they're looking at, just to kind of help answer their questions as they navigate and engage your tool. I guarantee that your users are going to appreciate your attention to detail and kind of anticipating their needs and thoughts as they walk through the visual. So this is a very dynamic sort of storytelling, feature that you can build into your tools if you do it in a very sort of, programmatic and deliberate way. So thanks again. I will see you in the next DAX tutorial.